Please welcome Ali Carey, Chief Strategy Officer with SEI, Private Banking and Wealth Management.
Hi, everyone. What a great morning, and I'm really excited to kick off the afternoon. Technology and investment solutions that connect the financial services industry. Our asset management solutions, our investment processing technology, and our operational outsourcing services help our clients, investment managers, financial advisors, family offices, and private banks deploy their capital in order to grow their business. So with that, I'd like to welcome our panel as I introduce this session. This panel is going to discuss the intersection between talent, human, and AI. And as we see the proliferation of artificial intelligence or machine learning or intelligence, as we've talked about today, there's going to be questions that come up as to how does this enhance our ability to recruit, to train, to reskill, to upskill our talent, as well as to augment. Our moderator for the panel today is Alan Bourne of Fairmount Partners. Alan focuses on originating and executing middle market investment banking transactions in the technology sector, and he's also on the board of directors of PAC. I'd like to welcome Alan and our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you. Really excited to be hosting, for Fairmount to be hosting the show, but also to be moderating this panel. And with me are Parth Thacker, Executive Director of Strategy within Strategic Development of Comcast Cable, Sam Buzzard, Director of Talent Strategy for Compass Business Solutions, and Vlad Korek, Head of Data Science at SEI Investments. So please welcome the panelists. Thanks. Before we kick off, maybe it would be helpful if each of you could introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and about your organizations, and then we'll get into it.
Well, thank you all for hosting us here today. My name is Parth Thacker. I work at Comcast. We are the largest ISP in the country. We have about 30 million plus customer relationships. And we've got a number of Comcast business colleagues here too, who can probably speak to the impact that our company has across the country. I sit within a team called Strategic Development. My role is a hybrid role between growth strategy work, M&A, corporate development, business development, and investing. Our role within strategic development is to really kind of keep a pulse on what's next in terms of growth opportunities for Comcast, whether it's adjacent spaces to the business or whether they're brand new growth vectors, keeping a pulse on kind of emerging technology and identifying ways that Comcast can kind of lean into new sectors.
Thank you for having us here, everyone. My name is Sam Buzzard, and appreciate you welcoming a Pittsburgh girl to the Philly area, so thank you for that. I lead as the Director of Talent Strategy for Compass Business Solutions. Compass is a women-owned consulting firm focused in organizational performance, particularly enabling people operations via talent strategy and recruiting, human resources, and training and development. So we want to talk about how do we get people into your organization in the best way, and how will AI help us do that? Before my role at Compass, I spent 7 of the last 10 years in the healthcare technology consulting space, and that gave a really good perspective into how do you use technology to influence your people operations. So thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. My name is Vlad Korek, and I work at SEI Investments, the same company as Ali just introduced, which is sponsor of this panel. So as many of you guys probably know, SEI Investments is a leader in the wealth management space. And my particular role is leading the data science team, building all these exciting AI, ML solutions, partner with business, trying to understand their business needs, and also how we can, when we build these algorithms, how they can bring the business value and so on. So in the last couple of years, we spent a ton of effort building intelligent automation algorithms that help extract information from documents that brought lots of business value for our company. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you all. So the topic of the panel today is AI and talent. And talent, you know, when you think about what has changed over the last, call it 3 years, in terms of remote and COVID and contingent, right? There's been a massive shift in the way people work and where they work and how they work, right? And now AI, you know, the goal of this topic is to understand how does AI impact all that, right? So a really future of work is an incredibly interesting space, and I'm thrilled to have this conversation. So the first question for each of you is, it'd be great to understand, just to sort of level set, how are you each, or how are your organizations each using AI today? Yep.
Sure. So, you know, when we think about AI, it kind of infuses a lot of our products and services today, and I'll provide a few examples of that. If you are a Comcast customer, you may have actually probably already used AI in some of these products. One of our flagship products is certainly our voice remote, which is, you know, a natural language processing remote, which allows you to have a much more interactive experience with our X1 platform. That's purely kind of AI, NLP-driven experience, and it provides and unlocks a lot of kind of fun aha moments whenever customers use it. Another way that we infuse AI into our products is with our security offering. So we're able to identify when there's motion in the home, when there's certain types of kind of boundaries in the image that, you know, a video camera or a doorbell is able to capture. Those are, again, examples of the ways that artificial intelligence infuses that particular product. Lastly, and this is a little less consumer-facing, AI is a critical underpinning for a lot of our network technology. So how can we proactively identify areas where either the network is facing issues so that we don't have to wait for a customer or a business to call in, and rather we can proactively remediate that. And what that oftentimes translates to is, you know, if you can proactively solve some of those issues programmatically, it prevents the need for a technician or somebody to actually physically go to a customer's home or go visit, you know, a part of our infrastructure, core infrastructure that's been laid out, which allows us to use, you know, that technician's time or engineer's time in a lot more effective way. So those are just kind of some examples of the way that we've been using kind of broader AI, you know, within our business.
Terrific. Sam?
I love my voice remote, by the way, Parth, because
I do too. Find the Lost Kingdom.
I don't know any of the channels at our house, so I would be lost without that and live there too long to not know the channels. In terms of how we're using AI in our people operations, right, one of the big things, at least for me, and central focus to what Alan said about, right, the access to the talent pools that have now come to us in a post-COVID world, right, where you have these options for remote and you're broadening the ability to hire people from markets where you hadn't had the opportunity to do that before. Well, in a lot of instances, recruiting teams are not getting bigger. They're either getting smaller, they're staying status quo. So what does that mean? We have to enable them in order to be able to seek out those broad talent pools. One of the ways that we're doing that are by using AI aggregates and sourcing. So we want to be able to touch as many of those people as we can. We want to be able to see as much of the talent that's available to us in the market. And the reality is it's very complementary to what our recruiters are doing today. The other place I think we're seeing this get introduced into our human interaction and people operation spaces are in areas where we can use it for like frequently asked questions, where somebody has the ability to interface with something that is on brand to the company on demand 24/7, and it feels authentic. So those are kind of our big areas. The third area that we've started to introduce as well is in, kind of those simulation interviews, right? Where you maybe don't have the availability of your experts and your technical experts to be able to conduct some of these, coding and development types of interviews that are more complex, right? And the availability of your candidate pool and your internal teams aren't aligning. We're able to do some simulations in those ways using some of the AI technology, and then being able to play those back and then looking for, how does that align to our business strategies?
I talked a little bit about this, but for SCI investments, one of the major areas where we use artificial intelligence, machine learning, is for intelligent document processing. We have a large number of teams in SCI who day-to-day they sit and extract, information from information from documents, from PDFs and so on. So one of the initiatives that we started a few years back was, okay, how we can help these teams. How we can help these people who are doing this day-to-day, they're bored, they want to leave SCI and so on, how we can build the solutions and system to help them basically make their job less painful and so on. So that's where we build over 50 different models. We did automate different processes, for example, funding memos, credit agreements, limited partnership agreements, and 10 different other document types and so on, which did brought a ton of value for our operations team. On the other hand, for our banking unit, that's where we spend a lot of time on building the algorithms for churn forecasting for our clients, for our larger banks, as well as segmentation, next best action, and so on. And then on the other hand, we also try to help our human resources team doing some natural language processing on the surveys, identify key trends in the unstructured data, and kind of help them drive their strategy.
Terrific. Sam, you talked a little bit about talent pools and how you all are using AI. Give us some perspective on how you think that AI has changed the job market in general.
We just had an example of this about a week or so ago that it has really sat with me, and it drummed up a lot of conversation internally. We had a client that was looking to fill some roles that are customer support-esque that require really strong writing skills. So there was a writing assessment affiliated with the interview process. When we got the writing assessment back, the team pretty unanimously agreed that had been written by ChatGPT. Okay, that's a good use of resources, but it led us to the question of, are we okay with that?
Right.
And we had a really divided house on that because it was the first time we brought it up, right? Some of our team said, I'm not sure if I'm okay with that because that's not the skill that we're hiring for. Some of our teams said, well, why wouldn't we be okay with that? That's utilizing the technologies that are now available to us, and as long as they are representing the content properly, why wouldn't we be okay with that? And I think that that's kind of on the leading edge of how that's going to influence what we hire for. Are we hiring for some of those skills that have been kind of in our long-term, buckets of need, or are we going to change to hiring for people who can use the tools available to them and then kind of augment how those roles look? I don't think that there's anything in kind of the conversation that we're having that says that we're doing away with those roles or in lieu of and using kind of some of those AI instead of, but how do we then augment what our expectations are of our incoming talent?
Well, that's a really interesting point, right? And so it almost, it raises the question of scalability. Right? Which is, how can I scale or how can your employees be more scalable? Well, I'm more scalable if I can use Excel, right? Don't ask me to do a DCF by hand because I'm not sure I could figure it out. It's been too long since I've taken, financial analysis in MBA school, and B, it'll take me a long, long time. Right? So if I can plug it into a system like an Excel and I can do it really fast, then I can do the other stuff. Right? So it becomes really interesting about, okay, well, if your job is writing and marketing and things like that, how much of it becomes creative and how much of it is, give me a starting point and then I can smooth.
I mean, if I may follow up on that, I think, some kind of interesting data points that we've kind of come across, right, is we've seen, at least in some initial POCs, almost a 20 to 30% improvement in terms of developer productivity, because they are able to use code assist tools today. They are able to focus on more value additive tasks versus things that perhaps they would view as not value additive, such as documentation. And if they can automate some of those things in their workflow, it makes them a much more productive and engaged employee. Also, number two, kind of falling on actually both of your guys' points is, there's kind of like a prevailing question of how is this going to, when we talk about AI, in this particular case, generative AI, what are the new roles that are potentially going to come out of it, right? I think a lot of folks may have heard about prompt engineering, whether that actually turns into like a new role or a new function will be interesting to see, but I'm kind of curious to see what kind of net new positions are actually coming out of it.
Right.
I think 15, 20 years ago, if you said product management was not a function, I think today most companies will be like, this is a critical position in our company.
How about, sorry to jump in here, but how about data scientists, right?
Data scientists, yeah.
Yeah, 2013, right? I joined SCI out of Temple University. I was wrapping my PhD, right? And people often ask me, okay, Vlad, what do you do? Who you are, right? And say, I'm a data scientist. Like, and they're like, what's that? Like, wait, are you a developer? Are you a business analyst? There is no data scientist now. What's interesting now, some of the same folks who asked me that question, right? They're saying, hey, Vlad, you see, I have a kid in college, he's thinking about picking the major. Can you, talk with him and say, hey, why he should choose, AI, machine learning, why he should become a data scientist. So, even going back like 7, 8, 9, 10 years back in the, we could see how landscape changed.
This isn't necessarily relevant to kind of, talent in the workplace, but even going earlier in the spectrum and thinking about the idea that we're talking about having all of these assisted writing tools going forward. How are schools going to assess, kind of that aptitude via the SATs, right? You think about some of that writing culture that's always been ingrained in that. Some of the things even in those early stages you're going to see evolve as technology like this becomes more mainstream.
Well, so when we at Fairmount, we've got a position that's a junior position that's sort of a straight out of college position called an analyst, and an analyst needs to be really good at math, right? They need to be really good at math and really good at Excel, and also needs to be able to communicate all the math stuff in a logical and coherent manner, right? So it's one, you got to be strong at math, and two, you got to be a really good writer, and we would run into situations all the time where you'd say, hey, this guy's brilliant, but cannot communicate to save his life, right? And when you're counting on somebody to be able to put something into a written document that that's got to be client ready, and you've got to present to clients, that's a fatal flaw. But if you can now leverage tools to say, the math stuff is harder, right? The math stuff's a whole lot harder, but if you can leverage these tools to help me communicate.
I completely agree. As somebody who is, love to code and build algorithms in Python and so on. At the end of the day, when you need to produce this documentation, which should be the easiest part, right? Right. That's actually the hardest part, right? Putting your thoughts in the word, how algorithm works and so on. So completely agree with you, Alan, on that.
Yeah. So let's turn it to recruiting. Parth, how do you see AI making an impact on the recruiting process?
So I think, I think when you think about the broader kind of value chain of like a recruiting process, I think I think AI will probably infuse every single one of them, right? Both as it relates to, the front of the funnel, sourcing candidates, all the way to, the interview process, to actually maybe even, whether you're doing case studies, whether you're going to do valuation models, whether, you do kind of virtual interviews, I think there's ways for AI to play a role there. If anything, I think it's an assistive task to especially all of our talent acquisition professionals, within Comcast, but I'm sure with a lot of companies. So to me, it's, I think, just going to make those professionals that much more proficient. The other component, I think, which I think will be important is, all of us have applied to various jobs, which we felt like we're extremely well suited for, and you've gotten dinged right, on the first go around. because maybe you didn't, pass the, the automated screening tool, I think it's like ATS systems or whatever they're
Right.
called. I'm hoping that, this technology evolves where it's able to actually be much more thoughtful around career progression, the functional role that an individual's had, hopefully obfuscating some of the, like PII kind of information perhaps that a resume has, so that, everybody's candidacy is viewed in a almost like level playing field.
I agree with that, and obviously, coming deeply from the recruiting profession, want to, certainly have access to more people and the best people. There's two things I think that could be potentially a net neutral or net negative, or maybe still an unknown, right? So you've got some of the, maybe pitfalls of expanding, your artificial intelligence into recruiting, and that's, how are we checking for bias, right? Are we leaving populations behind who don't have access to those types of technology or aren't using them in the way that we would readily assume that the general population is? I know some of those tools are starting to explore that, but I haven't seen, the depth of methodology on how do we ensure that we're fair and equitable in that way yet. I'm sure that's coming.
Well, part of it is that there may be inherent bias in what you feed into the AI systems.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. The second piece of that, I think, is just remembering that regardless of how assistive the artificial intelligence technologies are, there are still human factors at play, right? People defy logic oftentimes, right? Because you have emotions, you have feelings, you have, ingrained principles that you can't put on paper, and that, kind of some of those functional back-end things won't be able to perceive from your personal experiences. And I think that's important to remember, is that the artificial intelligence in the recruiting process facilitates a lot. It doesn't do away with the need for the human interaction and human connection and validation of how does someone fit into an organization or a role when you sit across the table from them, or virtually sit across the table from them, and feel the energy and feel how they represent your organization.
Right, and the idea that teams function differently, right? And you need different personalities and different skill sets, right? You can measure the skill sets, but how do you measure the personality? Like, Vlad's going to get along with Sam, but not with Parth.
Right.
Interesting.
If I can add to that point, right, another pitfall. I was, reading my favorite HR blog, Life After Layoffs, and one of the interesting concerns there was, if you use algorithms to screen the candidates, right, and try to find the best candidates for certain job positions, how about the folks who are looking to switch careers, right? You might not have any of the skills that job posting require, right? But if you go in and talk with human resources team and have that conversation in person, you can explain your situation. Hey, this is where I started career. This is what I'm thinking, and they might go and say, okay, this actually person, fits this particular role, maybe not this particular role, maybe some other role inside of our organization. While AI, if it's not trained properly and so on, and not accounting for these kind of use cases, can reject candidates immediately.
Vlad, let me ask you a question. So one of the things that, particularly within large organizations like SEI, is you've got a big organization, you've got skills gaps within the organization. How do you think about AI being able to understand and address organizational skills gap from a hiring or an internal mobility perspective?
That's a great question, right? And if you think about that, if you talk about natural language processing, right, the ability to process large amounts of unstructured data, and if you think about the performance reviews that employees have over the years, right, and if you look at different job postings and so on, AI can easily, machine learning can easily identify these skill gaps, right? Say this is the set of skills that you should have, this is what you have, and so on. And what is great about that, then we can also leverage AI, and I talk about that in a little bit, is how then AI can be leveraged to create personalized learning paths for each of the employees, right? To say, okay, hey, Vlad, maybe you know Python, right? But you don't know R, and we really need R, right? How about you go in and take this course on R, or you go in and maybe attend this conference and learn about these new techniques and so on. And that's how you can grow as an employee, and you appreciate that. And I believe that AI can definitely help in that space.
Well, that's actually an interesting point, right? If you can combine combine AI with some sort of career progression tool or career coaching tool where you self-identify. I'd really like to be this. And then the AI can tell you, based on the 1,000 candidates or the 1,000 people in this position, you're missing these skills, and tie that into L&D or learning and development. Or it can say, yeah, that's great, but I'm looking at your skill set and you really ought to consider this because you're a perfect match for the 8 positions that we've got in the firm that have your unique set of capabilities.
Absolutely, I can definitely see AI machine learning algorithms, either already being implemented or the organization actually working on these type of use cases to try to, help, human resources team to actually use them for these specific purposes.
Right, Sam. So thinking about being able to identify skills gaps it's sort of quantitative. When you think about talent management and employee development more holistically, how do you think AI plays into that?
One of the things I was thinking about while you were talking, Vlad, is actually one of the validation tools that we use and I have used with internal stakeholders to ensure that they are giving their employees proper feedback on their job descriptions and where they're going next. There are some tools in the market today where you can input either a resume or a job description and it will output for you. If you put in a job description, it'll output the ideal candidate profile based on how the AI sees the match. Similarly, you are able then to do the same thing with a resume, and then it'll spit back out the ideal job description to that resume. And oftentimes when I slide those two documents across the table to my stakeholders, they say, oh, those don't match. That's not who I wanted from that job description, or that's not the job description I would have put together for that resume. And I think that it's kind of making us look in the mirror and talk a little bit more about what are the skills you really need to have people be successful? And then what skills are you really looking for them to develop in order for them to progress in their careers, right? So you've had, people who have been in, staff or individual contributor roles and they want to become a manager. And are we focused on the right blend of, technical skills and soft skills? That's up for debate. And I think that AI in that instance has the ability to facilitate those conversations.
Interesting. One of the things that is interesting, and we're hitting it without really addressing it, is the move to a skills-based employment model, which is, my job demands these technical skills or these particular skills. It doesn't necessarily demand a degree in engineering from Penn State, right? Which is sort of interesting. Great. So Parth, thinking about skills gap, thinking about the way that AI can help people progress along their careers. What are some other ways that AI can be used in learning and developing talent within an organization?
So the first thing I'd recommend, if you haven't already seen it, Sal Khan, who founded Khan Academy, had an amazing TED Talk very recently about how they're incorporating OpenAI's APIs into their platform. Phenomenal program, both in terms of education for the actual consumers or the students of their platform, but they also have all these kind of teacher-facing tools that they're developing. So just a quick call out to that. But I think, to me, I think, when we think about team composition in strategic development in particular, a lot of it's really focused on, what are the capability gaps and, how do we create a team that's very heterogeneous in terms of capabilities so that we're not only hiring former bankers or former consultants, right? We're also bringing in folks who are former product managers, people who are very technical in nature, et cetera. And so, to me, as I kind of look forward, I think it's very much a skills-based discussion, not necessarily the type of degree or the type of profile. We're recruiting for junior talent today, and we're being very mindful that we're not hiring just analysts coming out of your shop. Right. And part of that is, are we looking at resumes? Are we looking at profiles for individuals who are bringing much more qualitative skill sets? Do they bring energy? Do they bring enthusiasm for the industry? Less so for some of the harder skills, because we think we can actually solve for that internally within the team. And I think just more broadly, like AI can probably be much more assistive as it relates to that.
Terrific. Vlad, so in a post-COVID world, retention is really important, right? Or retention has been really important. And you think about the Great Resignation, and one of the areas I think that people have been focused on, or organizations have been focused on quite a bit, is how do we engage our employees? How do we engage them and retain them in a world where switching jobs is as easy as just changing my email address, right? Because I got my setup at home. I'm working for somebody else. So how do you, is there a role for AI in engagement? Is there a role for AI in employee retention?
Absolutely, Alan. Absolutely. Let's talk about the GitHub Copilot, right? So, for example, if we pick up example of developers, and each organization have a large development organization now these days. If you're a developer, it takes days to some of the coding challenges, right? It takes sometimes even weeks to develop this functionality that business is asking for you. And in some cases, imagine if you can ask, or now you can actually ask the question of ChatGPT or Copilot or similar sorts of techniques to say, okay, hey, I have this problem, son, give me the solution here. And now you're looking for answer. Even this answer is not 100% complete. Still, the fact that you can get almost a solution that is out there and you can implement that helps a lot, right? Then you feel, oh great, I accomplished this. You suddenly say, okay, maybe my job is not that bad, right? And so on. So I can maybe focus on the other projects and so on. And then if you also talk about the code debugging, right? For folks who are technical and ever wrote a line of code, they know what is how hard and frustrating is to debug your code and so on. So the ability to actually ask Copilot, so on, hey, I have this problem, so on, help me out, solve it, and so on. Instead of reading these blogs and Stack Overflow and so on, trying to find the answer, it's just amazing. And in my opinion, that's a huge win for both organizations and employees, because you're solving your job. It's not that painful.
It was not a coincidence that this morning you saw a lot of representation of the employee experience in the demo pit, right?
Right. Terrific. So AI is awesome. Parth, how do we think about, from an organizational perspective, compliance when it comes to AI?
Yeah, great question. We certainly haven't quite figured out that. I think you're seeing a lot of large enterprises right now either take a very almost, I don't want to say extreme necessarily, but a very rigid stance. I think Samsung recently came out and said no one's allowed to use, no employees are allowed to use OpenAI's products and solutions today. And then you have kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. As part of my job, I'm talking to a lot of consultancies around kind of their perspectives around generative AI, and they've got a number of anecdotes around sales representatives that want to write an email to a client, and they'll ask ChatGPT to write it, they copy and paste it and send it, right? Without real clarity around what information is actually getting fed back, what information is getting fed back to their large language model, whether, there's any mistakes, et cetera. Yeah. And so, I think you're going to see a little bit of this ebb and flow as especially large companies try to figure out what's the right balance. We've got regular internal engagement with our legal and policy teams to start kind of putting down what are AI best practices. I literally was talking to OpenAI yesterday. They're actually putting into place ways for enterprises to keep private data private, and they themselves, almost on a weekly basis, are actually publishing private, privacy blog posts around their privacy, because there are open questions from enterprises as to, if we use your APIs, what information, what inputs and outputs are actually, used to further tune your models. to OpenAI's credit, they say none of that information is used, period. Their large language models are kind of steady state. But when you talk to our internal IT operations group, they're like, our data is not protected. We don't have comfort around it unless we're hosting something internally within our firewall.
Yeah. And in fairness, it was a prospect email, not a client email.
Fair.
So I did not provide client information to OpenAI. But you raise a point, which is when you're talking about sensitive information, at least today, right? You're sending your query out to OpenAI. It leaves the system,
Yes.
right? It leaves the system, and the fact that everything that we do today is within the system, and when you add the complexity about something leaving the system, how do you create processes and security around that?
Exactly. Or how do you construct kind of a technical architecture that allows you to preserve your information within the firewall, but still able to engage with a large language model that's external to it?
Right.
Or alternatively, right, the opposite of that is, we're kind of probably detracting a little bit, but this is kind of my job, so get excited by talking about it, is alternatively, from a strategic standpoint, you bring the model in-house, right? And so you're seeing this explosion of kind of startup and model provider ecosystems, which are trying to solve this challenge for enterprises and businesses.
Well, and that's what Sean at Olive was talking about, because they're
Exactly.
dealing with a lot of healthcare data. Right, and you've got HIPAA compliance associated with
Right.
that, and how can you be HIPAA compliant if you don't have the model in house?
Right.
Completely separate from talent. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I do want to open it up for some questions. So to the extent that folks have questions, just raise your hand. There's someone there with the mic. Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great panel, tons of fantastic information. I haven't formed this into a question yet completely, so just bear with me. But I think the area with which I'm most concerned is in the recruiting space. Because as opposed to the healthcare example that we're talking about where we had small sets of data, we have a ton of data, and it's crap. It's so biased, it's so bad. And it's just going to reinforce, and we're moving so quickly that it's just going to reinforce all of those things, especially when it comes to people with disabilities. And I know at Comcast, obviously, you have senior executives with disabilities, you have the accessibility lab, it's amazing, your leaders, the voice. But now we're moving so fast that we're leaving digital accessibility completely behind. Even with the screening tools, they're not accessible. And so I think that there's some real major issues. So if anybody has anything around digital accessibility as it plays into especially screening tools or recruiting talent, I'd love to hear something about that.
Yeah, so I came from healthcare technology for a good chunk of my career, right? And to your point, are we addressing 508 compliance? Are we addressing any of those types of compliance up front in some of these components? Not fully yet, I don't think. And some of the things that I've seen recently, right, around the idea of using the influence of some of this AI in recruiting is going to open companies up to some new compliance laws. And I've seen some drafts of some of those things that are going around, and it is very specific to being able to outline how your process is working, where are you putting that information, how are you accounting for accessibility, how are you accounting for diversity and inclusion. And I'll be honest, as a recruiting professional, that's going to change the game for a lot of people because you're blending art and science right there, and then you're asking everybody to put that on paper. It's going to need to happen. I don't know that businesses are prepared to account for that just yet.
And if I can add to your point about the crappy data, right? Who doesn't have crappy data here, right? But when we talk about that, one thing I would like to amplify that I have really strong personal opinion, and I also heard this morning from Peter Coffey. It's about model explainability, right? You were talking about we have this bad data, we train this model moving too fast and so on. We need to spend more and more time into understanding these, especially black box models and so on. Techniques such as SHAP, LIME, integrated gradients, and so on, new developments and so on are required for us to really understand what did model build and how we can use this information. You know, just using it blindly without understanding, in my personal opinion, it's very dangerous. It can, you know, lead to, you know, we talk about finance and healthcare, and so it's, you know, we already have their kind of need to build the models that are more explainable and so on. But I believe in, you know, human capital management. That's also a really big need.
Other questions? Up top? Or midway up, I should say.
So very similar to this gentleman's question too, because I've learned a lot today about AI, and I coincidentally work for Comcast in the sales department. So I have some interesting questions because I'm also an enterprise and SMB. And just like, again, I'm trying to combobulate my thoughts to produce my question because it's very complicated, just to be transparent and honest. But with that being said, like you said, I have a huge CRM, as you know, part that has, I can't even quantify the amount of data that we have. Now, I heard from, again, HR perspective, data management and data science perspective, but my question to you coming from a sales perspective, because I'm obviously in the sales channel, coincidentally with Comcast Business, how are we utilizing, whether you want to talk to us specifically or just generally, to, I'm not going to say make things simplistic, but because again, we come across so much data of all shapes and sizes, good, bad, evil, nice, this, that, like, again, I'm trying to ask my own question here.
Is the question, how, as a salesperson, my organization has a ton of data on customers and prospects and things like that. How do I use it? Or what are the tools that are going to enable me to leverage it?
So the current tools I have, I know how to utilize, but since we have that to, I can say, magnify by millions, maybe even billions. I mean, I'm just talking out loud here, just again, because of this topic of AI. I've learned so much today, like I said, since this morning. How is Comcast specifically, again, maybe you can or cannot answer this question, like use all the possible theorems or AI science, or to just, because now again, coming from a sales channel, so I talk to literally, my job every day, to be a little bit more specific, is I talk to hundreds of people, phone calls, door knocks, emails, etc., throughout the country. Again, because like you said, I talk to the Best Buys, the Home Depots of the country. So to use AI to not even necessarily simplify a process to make it more likely to close a deal of all shapes and sizes, but again, I guess it's a complicated question because there's so many different variables to make my, it's complicated.
Well, you're trying, is there a way to streamline your job to make you more scalable and sell more stuff?
In some way, shape, or form, and that's a huge mega form because I would say it's probably in the form of the sky because there's totally limitless probably avenues, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm happy to take the first shot at that because it seems like you're asking a Comcast-specific question. So there are a number of initiatives that we're starting to kick off, but I certainly can't share them prime time. But if you want to find me afterwards, I'm happy to share with you just because, you know, they're kind of more internal things that we're kicking off. But there's probably 2 points that I'd like to make just more broadly as it relates to kind of sales, right? So one is, a common thread here is data hygiene, right? Regardless of which language model you end up using, right? Whether it's OpenAI's, whether you go with your own open source one off of, a platform called Hugging Face where you can literally just download a model and actually train it yourself. Data hygiene is critical because, the model's output is only as good as the inputs that you're providing it. And so I'll give you like a quick anecdote, right? We have a lot of customer chat interactions that come in every day through our Xfinity Assistant tools. And, we had 2-3 data scientists, a couple software developers literally spin up a chat tool powered by an open source model within 2 weeks, right? They pulled in 3 months of chat log data and, everything, all PII information, all customer information's, none of that's ever saved. It's just the interaction itself. And the model was operating. It was a bounded model because the quality of the data was literally just the chat log information. So you didn't have hallucinations, you didn't have to implement a ton of guardrails, et cetera. So number one, data hygiene. Number two, the second point that I'd make is we've spoken to Microsoft and specifically the Dynamics team a little bit, which is really kind of like the Salesforce competitor. They've been playing around with OpenAI for greater part of a year. They've got a strategic relationship with OpenAI. They integrated it into Dynamics. They actually have already found that it's saving sales reps 3.5 hours per week in terms of customer reach out. When you add that up to a year, it's just slightly less than a month of working time that a sales rep saves because of adding generative tooling into the CRM solution. And tactically, what does that mean? Things such as auto-crafting emails, some notifications. Hey, you haven't, touched base with this customer in a certain period of time. This is what their profile is. Here's some content, or here is an email, or here's a message that you should maybe send them, to kind of reconnect. 3.5 hours per week, right? And this is literally as they're kind of testing out their dynamic solution. Salesforce also announced a partnership with OpenAI as well, as of just a few months ago. And I imagine that we're going to see kind of a very quick adoption into their workflow. So a lot more to come. Happy to share with you a little bit more kind of one-on-one in terms of some of the other activity that we've got underway. But hopefully that kind of at least hits upon some of your questions.
If you could be so kind enough to share that tool for the 3.5 hours plus that would be very beneficial, because that's just fabulous news. But thank you so much for answering.
Great. Thank you all, and thanks to the panel, Parth, Sam, and Vlad. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.